Welcome back, everyone. In today's lesson, we're going to cover exchange sacrifices, which is when you sacrifice your rook for one of your opponent's minor pieces. And if you're serious about chess, this is a positional sacrifice that you have to know. So we're going to take you through it today. We're going to go through a few examples, as always, so that you're well equipped to play this in your games. And last but not least, we're going to finish off with one of the classic exchange sacrifice games, Kasparov versus Shirov. So let's get into it. My name's Philip. I'm here to help you improve your chess. I'm a 2100 FIDE rated player from New Zealand, and let's get into it for real now. So this is a position where white has this square that they want to plonk their knight on. An exchange sacrifice here would be rook takes f6. Now, why is this effective? Because once the bishop takes, the knight takes back. White has a whole bunch of pressure against black's kingside on the light squares and on the f-file. Okay, so now the queen has to move, and white continues their attack. Could be something like rook f1 or queen g5, etc., etc. And white has essentially sacrifice the rook to have a positional advantage, where white is saying, I don't think that rook that you have extra for my knight is worth as much as my knight. And that is a monstrous knight. That is essentially the principle behind why someone would sacrifice a rook, which is worth more material and it's a stronger piece than a minor piece. But you're pretty much saying, hey, look, I think I can get this position to a point where my minor piece is stronger than your rook. Let's take a look at another example. This is actually, let's take a step back. Just want you guys to really memorize this one, because sacrificing the exchange to get a knight outpost, particularly on d5, is a very strong idea. It happens in a lot of games. Not too common, but it's one of those dark arts type of chess things that you just got to know. Otherwise, your opponent will play it against you, and then you'll be shocked as to, you know, you wouldn't have even considered that they would take your knight with the rook. So yeah, exchange sacrifice number 2. This is a very common one. It can happen mostly for white, but a lot of the time for black as well, just depending on, you know, if the colors were reversed. Essentially here, white wants to rip open the kingside and is going to play this move h5. And white is not scared of black taking with the knight, because the exchange sacrifice rook takes h5 comes in, which rips open black's position. And after bishop h6, black doesn't really have too much better than bishop trade. And then white's threatening knight to g5, followed by mate. So we're going to play f6. And then after knight d5, you can kind of see how weak black's light squares are. Let's say the queen drops back to defend. This knight is going to come over here. And suddenly this bishop is coming to h5, which is going to make it difficult for that rook to come to the 7th rank to defend. This rook is going to slide over to h1, and white just has a blistering attack out of nowhere, or seemingly out of nowhere, but it all happens because of that exchange sacrifice. So this is a very common one. Memorize it in your games. All right, what do we have next? Cool. Also, one of the key ways you can use exchange sacrifices is to get a winning endgame. And this is, so we've looked at a couple of examples where we've given a rook for a knight, or rather ended up with an extra knight while the opponent had an extra rook. And we were claiming that our knight was better than the rook. In this case, we're gonna look at how effective bishops are if you have a bishop over a rook, as well as a couple of pawns to go along with it in the endgame. So in this example, black plays knight c4, threatening knight to d2, check, winning the rook. But white just simply says, you know what, I actually think I'm going to take your pawn. And after a couple of moves like this, black might go check here. black has to defend against bishop to b7, and after something like this, b5 takes, black can find themselves in a very lost position pretty quickly, because that bishop on g2 is an absolute monster. And after a few moves, let's go d7, king b5. This a pawn is just going to swing all the way up to a7, and that bishop, you can see clearly, is much stronger than the rook. And again, that all happened because of that exchange sacrifice. Rook takes c4, and white was winning. Cool. Okay, so you can kind of see how important it is to assess positions, not just by objective, material. One side's got a rook, one side's got a minor piece, but you have to look at the exact position as well. And that's where exchange sacrifices come into play. This is Kasparov versus Shirov, one of those classic exchange sacrifice games. This one is just pure beauty. It's a Sveshnikov Sicilian, or rather it transposes to it after bishop f4, then bishop g5. So the key point of this type of a position is black has essentially given up the d5 square, right? And we can kind of have a think about what might happen in this game. Black's purposefully given up that d5 square, claiming that they're going to have compensation and more active pieces with how things develop. This is just the main line, c3, and then the knight comes over here, essentially planning to swing over to e3, further supporting that knight. And you can see white's given up that dark squared bishop on g5 for the knight on d5, on f6, which was challenging the d5 square. So this is where things get really interesting, and this is such a unique sacrifice. Shirov played knight to b8. You can kind of see Shirov's pretty much saying, I'm going to move my knight to d7 and b6, and then trade all the pieces on d5, and you won't have any advantage on that square. Kasparov plays a4, and after the rook, after the pawns are exchanged, check this move out. Rook to b4, knight to c5, and an absolute screamer, rook takes b7. Exchange sacrifice, and this is the killer move here, b4. Why is that the killer move? Well, this move essentially kills that knight. This knight is absolutely dead. It cannot go anywhere. This dark squared bishop cannot challenge that square. And black's pieces are essentially dead. They don't have any good squares. White doesn't have any sort of weaknesses that black can attack. After Shirov tries to activate his pieces, get his king to safety, Kasparov just, continues this way. That pawn on b4, I mean, it's such a solid position. Everything is defending everything, and that knight is absolutely dead. The extra rook that black has is just not really doing much. Queen to b8, and then after Kasparov activates on the king side and shuffles the knights over, he gets his king to safety, his queen comes out, and you kind of, Shirov's essentially saying, I don't mind if you play knight to d7 and take my rook, just get rid of those knights. They're such a pain in the ass. Honestly, look at those knights. They're deep into Shirov's position, and they're going to apply pressure. Knight d7. I mean, this is horrific. Look at Shirov's knight. Look at all of Shirov's pieces except that rook on d2. Everything's pretty passive. Kasparov wins back the exchange in exchange for a very dangerous pawn on the b file. That pawn can become a queen in a few moves, and Shirov's got to watch out for that. Queen f5, threatening queen takes h7 and queen d7, which is deadly. The rook prevents queen d7, and after the bishop gets out of the way, queen takes h7. A few moves later, Shirov, you think Kasparov's lost the bishop? No way. Knight check. Knight back. And in a few moves, Shirov simply resigns because there's nothing to be done. That rook is going to go all the way down to a8 or a7. Kasparov shuffles a little bit, and after Shirov plays bishop to c1, Shirov plays knight to e3, threatening knight f5, winning the queen, or knight d5, depending on what Shirov plays. Shirov just has too many threats to defend against. Rook a8, rook a7, knight d5, knight f5. He resigned in this position, and that all started with that beautiful, beautiful, let me go back to it, absolutely beautiful, where is it? Rook to b4, knight c5, and an absolute hammer of a move. Exchange sacrifice, rook takes b7. So there you have it. A few examples, a few definitions, and a game by one of the greatest players of all time, Garry Kasparov, showing you how effective exchange sacrifices are, how to play them. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys got something out of the video. If you're interested in seeing more of this stuff, consider subscribing.